All right, well, we're cutting the felt a little wider for these bigger trees. We've tipped it over to work as well because these don't sit vertically on the workbenches nice. And it's actually kind of easier because pinning the edges with staples, the staple gun kind of has to be in the surface of the tabletop that way, whereas when it's tipped up like this, you can actually get here a lot easier, and you can kind of see that you've got everything stuck down real good. So there's a benefit to this. We chalked it a little bit so it's not trying to roll away, and overall those are the least finished of them all. We've got the one in the corner over there. Now that's the one I did the paper demo for this, and I think it worked okay. I think it looks good from afar, but it's far from good when you get up close. It's got more of these flap things happening, and you want to glue and staple the paper if you're going to staple it. Like there's a staple there first before you spray it black, because again, the staple, you can see that standing out and it'll shine out there under house light, so I'm going to have to hunt those down because I stapled it after I painted it here because I had some loose areas. So again, it looks good. It's got that real heavy bark, and we wanted a variety here, so I'm going to leave it at least for right now. That was where I pre-folded it and really tried to get a lot of hills and valleys. Now this was more of a twist, same type of paper, but more of a, I did roll it up, then I flattened the roll, and then I twisted it one way, and then I think I twisted it the other, and just trying to get more of these diamonds. You can see that, or I don't know what to call them overall, but rather than long lines running together the way that has over there, this has got more of those open and closing repeating shapes, long ellipses or pointed, kind of vaginal if I'm honest. Anyway, the point is that we're looking for certain forms here, and even between these two trees I did the same thing with the paper, but it appears a little bit different in terms of texture from this tree to the other tree, and we'll use two different colors to dry brush here, and we'll end up with what looks like different species of tree. Then I pivoted to a different type of paper, went to that ultra thin, not ultra thin I shouldn't say, it's not as thin or as delicate as the paper towel paper that I originally tried doing this part with, that we moved and we pivoted to felt over there. This is like a butcher paper, and it's quite thin rather than being construction papery, which is what I used on these pieces here, but it's actually kind of hard to get it to rip, and it has a bit of, I don't want to call it waxy, but it's very smooth on one side, a bit more texture on the other side. And so here I've taken it right from off the roll and just started gathering and twisting, no rolling it up and no flattening that. And so then I'm getting this sort of finer texture again. And you'll notice that this is a little sharper than once it's been painted black. You get a lot of ridges and folds, but the process of soaking the black paint in, it expanding and then drying, actually rolls and smooths those out a little bit. So you don't end up with so many. I had more of that here, and so we've yet to see how much it changes after it's been painted, but I'm pretty happy with that sort of really fine texture. Hopefully it's even finer still. So when I set the two, this is the other one that's that size. When I set those two together, I'd like for those to look appreciably different. So it's different type of paper, different kind of crinkling operation. And when I'm laying it out too, so when you lay it out, you can either sit the middle down and chase the wrinkles out to both sides, or you should do that in every case. But basically you have a choice between forcing some real highs and lows and like gathering the paper as you sit it down to make more dimension, or you can pull it flatter kind of, and that's what I've been doing here also. So I might have gotten a heavier texture out of this exact crinkle, but I chose to lay it out a little more and pull it down a little tighter. But you have to be careful because I don't want to put lines and features in that direction that I was sort of doing that, but always moving up and down so that anything I'm doing to the paper with my fingers is still keeping that for the most part up and down. It's these sideways guys that you want to try to avoid them because they ruin the effect. If 99% of it's doing that and you get one big sort of veiny wrinkle through the middle of it in the wrong direction, it kind of ruins the effect. So you want to be careful of that. But pretty soon here we're going to be done with the trees. That's good enough to go on stage, but I'll probably use another color there and do a little bit more highlighting down the road. But I want to get everything to that point now, and I'm still just adding layers to the outside edge. I think I've said 4 we'll do it here, so we're at 3 at this point. We started with 4 here, and we've got another piece that we glued up already. So before I leave today, I'll add another layer. But we've got quite a bit of operating to do on this. I've decided that on the side that's going to be the wedding cathedral, that we're going to take this amount out of it. So we're going to start right here, cut that off, and take this lobe out basically to here. And then we'll have a cutout back to the smaller circle, and that'll be wedding caked stairs out here, each of the steps kind of curved, and that way Fiona and Farquaad can be up here, and I'm going to end up taking this component out of here, so we'll have a triangular hole that'll probably just, we'll probably have the triangular piece that sits in there, at least for when the multiple Fionas exit and hide back here for that Act 1 musical number where this is Fiona's tower over there. So we'd like a nice complete floor here with no safety hazards. But when we turn this around and we're facing it this way with the stairs and it's the wedding, we'll probably take that piece right out and leave it. And so Fiona and Farquaad will have room up here to walk, but our fog geyser will be in here somewhere, maybe right in there, right in the front. And basically when the geyser goes off, Farquaad can hop and drop down into this piece, and it'll look as though he's been burnt up and that he can disappear. So we've got the geyser effect and the cloud effect both in there. We have at least one crew member in there to put the brakes on this piece so it's not jiggling around, and to maybe babysit the fogger or something. I'm not sure. And then we're gonna have Farquaad in there when he dies or whatever at the end of the show. And we've got the front of Duloc that we've got to get out of the basement still and get started with that. And we're going to do something for Shrek's house. And we've got a bunch of little things like the campfire and the singing bird that explodes. And we're going to take a stab at those here, obviously, before the show goes on. This is spring break, so no one's in here all week. But as soon as I can get some helpers, we're also going to put the roof of the tower up, and at least at that point, and start looking at how those forms look centered and where we hang it, and what it looks like in the house. So that's all coming down the pike. But back to crinkling up paper in a professional way and making sure that we get those. I mean, that really looks good. It changes when you first paint it black and it's glossy because the paint is wet. It still looks this good, and the gloss really helps texture pop. But I don't know if it's in becoming flat or in drying that it's changing some of this nice dimension. I think the dry brush is going to catch a lot of it again. Just pop that up. But anyway, we'll be back. Okay, something other than trees finally. Believe me, I've been chipping at this thing, but nothing that spectacular. Basically just adding layers. We got up to 4 everywhere, but in this little spot right here. But we're at 4 all the way around. Why not here? Because I had anticipated, now this is the halfway point here. So the front is Fiona's tower, and the multiple Fionas have to sneak back here and hide out for that musical number. Now this side facing us is the altar and the church for the wedding scene at the end. And so anyway, you need stairs to head up there, and they'll also work for escape and to load people in, load Fiona's doubles and herself in and out of this too. I thought about bringing out a separate set of stairs and setting them and then taking them away, all to keep this handier, but like a square normal set of stairs is going to be loose, and unless it's heavily built to be nice and sturdy, it'll be janky and weird. Now if it's lighter, it's easier to run out and set it and bring it back in off of stage, but I don't know, I could make something with handles on it. I ended up just attaching it to this piece and sort of cutting it in here. Now I had thought that I'd work from this joist out to that joist and make them wider and more spectacular layered stairs, and so I had made the ends and the middle ones and everything, these stringers out of plywood. But then I realized if they're sticking this far out at this angle and they come out like this, you can see the back side of them when you're looking at Fiona's tower, which ruins that illusion. So I tucked them back into the next radial joist. There was probably a sweet spot in here somewhere, but I'm already working with a stud and a joist in this position, and frankly I had just added another one here and there to be any wider, and then I have to make another stringer or 2 out of plywood because the span between them, especially out here at the limits, gets to be greater. And so I just struck a balance between this infrastructure already being here, having already made all of these, and thinking I had to make another one for in the center. But instead I just added a couple studs in here to carry those. Anyway, I can stand on these and they don't move up and down. They're hanging, they're mounted. These 2 middle ones are mounted onto the side of a stud. Now these end ones, they go right up onto the side of a joist as well. So they're into the side of this joist and into that stud. So they are load bearing to a greater extent on the outside edges, which will be good because I'm going to use a nice heavy double layer of plywood curved tread. And when I anchor it from here to there, then I end up with a lot of structural support in here that's taking some of the load off of this central stringers. And so overall, we're doing all right. Another thing that I ended up doing is encringing on this as far as possible. So I moved the face of the step that ends up at the top level here into the circle as far as I could, where the edges of it are still on this, basically. And more importantly, 1 inch of this piece here is still on it. Now, it would have been these two when I made this decision. When I laid out the stringer, it was all based on taking this much of the surface of the top of the wall as part of this second step down. And so I scooched it back to there because I thought not only this guy, but this guy and that guy would have to be cut off, leaving only 1 inch for, to bear that load onto the lip there. Now, fast forward, and I take even less, and I probably could have got away with taking even more of a step here and making this superficial, because this area here is all going to have to be changed in terms of its framing, because I got to have a fog geyser here to shoot straight upward so that Farquaad can disappear into the hole into this piece and look like he gets burnt up in the show. And so all of this is going to change. And so worrying about having 1 inch here of a ledge for this thing to sit on and bear the weight, it's all going to go away. Anyway, I could have tucked that in even further, but at that point I'm squeezing how much room I've got before I've got a usable trapdoor space behind the backdrop, the wall that will be built on this thing. So it's a bit of in the field, basically 2 weeks to go on the show here, dialing this in. 1 week until tech rehearsal. So I got to have everything functional, at least for tech rehearsal, so everybody's experienced it, and we'll have the fog geyser going and the fog underneath and all of that stuff too. So we got to be able to walk up here. And so you could put double layer plywood on these and try to find the edge of the 3/4 inch plywood underneath it. I'm just going to use blocks in here like this on the sides of these to actually screw things into. More importantly, I'm going to use 1 layer of curved Luan to do the face, the riser face of these, not structural whatsoever, but trying to screw into the edges of the plywood is going to be tearing that all to pieces, and it won't pull the screw head down into the Luan real nicely. So I went from the top surface here all the way down with a 2x4 or some kind of stick all the way up, so that both screws that I use to put that Luan are going into the side of the grain, rather than the horizontal piece that I'm going to add to the side here, having end grain all here, and then trying again to pull that screw into that end grain and be nice and flush into that Luan won't want to pull in. So I chose to do it this way. This is perfectly good extra load bearing. If the screw wipes out trying to screw the tread down, it won't hurt anything, and back here I'll be able to screw the tread down. It does create a potential for creaking, so I set everything a little low here. Set it back and a little low, so if anything I can put tension on stuff rather than pulling something in tightly and leaving something else loose and to rub. It's either fully tight or fully away from the surface, and worst case scenario you can put a little glue if you really can't shut something up, but that's more of a permanent thing. This is all going to be torn back apart after this. We will get 1/2 of the flat intact, but this other half is one and the same with the sidewall now, and one and the same with these stairs. So come strike day, I think a lot of this is going to be taken apart. There may be this weird semicircular section with a notch out of it that I'm able to preserve on this as a functional piece for in the future, and it's interesting in its own way. So anyway, a few more blocks to make, a couple of treads. Oh, something else that's cool is when I made this circular ring and circular base, the outside of the cut is pretty close to this, even though I did it with the jigsaw, but I need the rest of this step. This is 1/2 of the step. I need basically this over here, 5-6 inches wide, and swings all around. But the thing is, I've got the negative left from that over here as a double layer plywood lamination already. And this is actually the base, because it's the one whole quad glue up of plywood. Anyway, but I can figure out whatever the depth that I need is, swing over here, and just scribe along this arc for as long as I need and cut, and that'll be good enough to make a step out of here. And I might even be able to get something else out of this somewhere else here, or a couple of pieces that go end to end and install. Anyway, I've got a couple other places. I've got this thing here that's still glued up, double thick all the way to the floor. There might be a step or most of one in there. So I'm going to try and be wise about things I've already glued up, but we're going to need plywood for the top of this anyway. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about getting these stairs in here. Oh, another thing that I screwed up was when I laid out these stringers, they hung down and came over here, and I thought that's an awfully sharp corner coming in close to the floor, and it'll be skewered under there, and even like rolling over the tarp and stuff here. If anything should get stuck, it'll be just carried around and caught and hooked up, and it'll be impossible to get underneath there and fix it. And so I just put a nice back angle on this so that hopefully it encouraged like a ski or something else stuff to get stuck and go sliding on by, if only for when we're working up here and I don't want something to get caught and scratch the floor, whatever. Unfortunately, I forgot that there's going to be a skirt on this piece to within a ½ inch of the floor all the way around this cylinder, and so really this needed to come over and intersect with that. So now I'm going to end up with this weird little triangle exposed. Maybe I could have nipped that corner on these inner ones, but really I shouldn't have as well. The Luan skirt needs to continue all the way around, coming down to about a ½ inch from the floor underneath here, because when we're pumping fog, we don't want a path of least resistance. If this has got a full exposed area underneath these stairs, a lot of it will be coming out behind this piece and wasted back here, rather than a little edge of it, pushing fog all the way out and around at the front 2/3 of this thing for appearance's sake. So I'm sneaking a little strip of Luan behind this thing anyway, and at that point that's hanging down. And if anything, it's more apt to be broken if there's nothing backing it up when it gets caught, if it should get caught. And so there's nothing there on the plywood. So I repeated something 4 times that I didn't think well enough about, or I thought too much. So these are the things you want to watch out for. I was just thinking it was handy to make them all like that, and I guess I kind of messed that up. So anyway, overall, I think it's still going to come together here. And I've got the felt and stuff on the bottom of these. Now, these aren't trees, so I'll throw them in this video because they're not trees, technically. The other side is. But this side that's got one whole circle, I've got to come up with something that I can skin this with that breaks up the transition from like the felt and the tape and these repeating little ledges of paper. That's enough over and over again to catch a highlight in the stage lights, and you'll see all those little lines, depending on how good your eyesight is. And potentially even this ink could come through a fair color, so we're going to have to base coat this whole thing something. And it would be nice if it was an actual color that we wanted it to be. So I've got to come up with a folded paper texture probably to apply to this. Or even just break this up with like Bondo literally or something. Just make a weird, ugly Bondo transition through here so that paper, really heavy paper, will lay down on this, maybe in like ripped, torn, almost like camouflage blotchy pieces. And not trying to make it look like camouflage, but in the sense that it's all these big blotches, that those will do a complex 3-dimensional shape like this, almost like doing it with paper mache, but ultra thin, just for the sake of getting a skin on here that breaks up the helical lines and this shape. And then you can do a base coat and a blotchy paint job, and you end up with what looks like stone or something, which is what we're going to try and have on this side for the catacombs under the dragon's lair. And we're also going to try to make this work for Duloc. So Duloc's kind of a different color than the catacombs, so I don't know how much. Maybe we'll keep the lights down for when it's under the dragon, and then it's just the color comes in with the rest of Duloc when the lights are up for Duloc really brightly, and we get away with that. It's gonna be tricky. And we're also going to hang a big banner on this for Duloc too, with a big F on it for Farquaad. So that might help. We may be able to put some details on here for when it's the dragon's lair that are obviously covered with that. But it's just a question of time now. It's a race against time. There's the trees are 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody's in flat black except that one. And those will be quick to dry brush. All right, we'll be back. Okay, so the next step here, no pun intended, is to put the treads in, and the top plate from this smaller wall ends up being a good portion of this particular tread as a result of cutting in as deeply as we could with a finite number of steps down at a minimum depth, means that the stairs hangs out this far. And so this is the unit of stairs, and it's the only really flexibility that you have is whether it as a group moves out or moves in. So obviously it behooves us to move it in because it keeps this thing as trim as possible. Could it have come in even further? Yeah, in terms of form, but in terms of the way that this thing is built, not really. It would really get into a problem. So making sure that I made up the rest of this tread was the first order of business, and I used the negative from cutting out this double thick ring Oh no, double thick circle, because that came out of a full laminated thing. And so anyway, the cut line from that was the perfect inner arc, and then I just scribed the, overall, I think it was 6 inches or something that I needed here, and it was yesterday, and cut and fit that in with a little bit of farting around to get the angle and spacing here. It's 45-degree angle at the faces of these studs, but then you got to move in 3/4 of an inch here and there. I guess it's still the same angle because that's an offset. Anyway, just some messing around. And then I needed to plot out the 3 remaining step surfaces here, each of which are 9.5 inches wide, 9.5 inches wide, 9.5 inches wide. And so that much more added to 9.5 inches here to the inner circle of this plate. And I know what that radius is from the center, which is why that screw is there. So I stuck my tape to that screw, which represents the center of all these circles because they're concentric. And I came out here and put the 9.5, or the diameter of this steps rise, yeah, right there. And the other 2 are just 9.5 inches, another 9.5 inches out here. And I basically just drew all that in CAD, the circles and the 45 degrees and offset the 3/4 inch plywood, and made some templates that I could bring down and trace onto this negative double thick plywood that I still had. Now, each of these full treads wouldn't even fit on a D size architectural sheet, which is 24 by 36 inches long. So they're all over 36 inches long. And so without a lot of dicking around, I just printed them in half and then tape them down and to flip them back and forth to trace. It was kind of hard to see whether or not all 3 would fit on here because I couldn't just throw the whole pieces of paper on the negative and shuffle them around to wherever they all fit. I kind of had to commit to where to stick them down. But anyway, I'm able to get the hole number 2 and the hole number 3 out of this piece, which are the more important ones. Number 1 is the top step, so number 3 is the longest, number 2's a bit shorter, and number 1 is the shortest of these 3. And I'll have to do him in 2 pieces, one over here and one over here. Here's the template here that I just traced out. I can't make a full piece, there isn't that much material left in the negative. It's going to be an elegant way to use up the rest of that negative. But the reason I'm choosing to do that, make 2 pieces out of the shortest step that we've got to make, is I will make the cut between them complementary 45-degree angle, and I'll glue it again there, and it's doing the shortest span where that seam is. To put that seam in this step and to put it into this step just continues to ask it to do a greater span, and that's basically right where everybody walks anyway. So we'll glue it. It'll probably be no different. It'll be just as tough, if not tougher, but we're just putting our best foot forward again, no pun intended, on making the 2-parter that shorter stair, and taking full benefit of the fact that we have the material left in this original lamination from the circle to make all these pieces, which at the end of the day you can turn around and say that's how you planned it. And again, if I had sat down, not again, but I'll say this, if I had sat down and had the time to build this exhaustively in CAD, then yes, I would have known that I could do this here, and there's even a greater amount of material efficiency to be gained from doing it that way. But all that time spent in CAD is carved out of my flat rate on this project, and I just can't double my time in the project for the sake of knowing all of these things up front, because it just means that my hourly rate is so much less. And not as a matter of pride, but that means I'm spending those hours working at a lower rate when I could be spending them working at my full rate. So long story short, we solved some of these problems in the field. These are the things that I touch on when I'm talking about best practices. I have this much negative because I originally chose to move that circle over to 2 of the outside sides of this lamination. I touched on it in that video and said, it's because the quality of the lamination out here is poor, but that's not going to hurt us on these stair treads. I can put some construction adhesive in there and it wouldn't have hurt us anyway. But the idea is, not only did I move over because of that, but again, it's that construction paper theory that I joke about. It's what we learn basically at the earliest stages of like running scissors and consuming material, i.e. Construction paper. And we talk about not going to the middle of the full sheet to cut a piece out, right? We move it over to the edges to maximize material efficiency. And so now I have the ability to get what I need out of the waste left over from material we purchased in either way, on either account. I don't think I could have cut one full 4x8 in half and gotten all 3 out of these out of a 4x4. It would be, I don't know. I don't think I could have. So you'd have been in for buying 2 more full 4x8 sheets just to get these pieces, which even if it was 1 sheet, it's about $35, $40 plus the trip. So a full 2 sheets and the glue, and next thing you know, you've got a couple $100 mistake in, you know, finding out, in this case, that you need these things and not having left yourself. Even that is quite a lot of double thick waste, and I don't even have 1 tread that I can get out of there in its entirety because of the nature of the shape that was left over. But we'll keep using that where it makes sense, and we'll use it till we use it up. Like the Native Americans will use every piece of the, more than that, all the tribal peoples of Earth will use every piece of the animal by the end. Okay, thanks for watching. We'll see you. All right, not bad for a couple hours work. Everything's essentially figured out here. I ended up needing to, like I was talking about before, block up at the front for the Luan and across the top to hold the tread down. And we looked at how effectively, or lucky we were basically, to get all of these treads out of the waste plywood. And that was when they were 9.5 inches deep. If they were 10 or 10.5 inches deep, they would have had a really nice lip here with a natural shadow underneath all of them, the way the ends were left long at least. But I wasn't able to get that to happen, so everything's essentially flush here. This is the kind of discrepancy you get when you don't have a router finished to a pattern shape, and more instances, like there's only a couple stringers here, so another stringer there could pull that in. But anyway, the rough geometry is in here. What does that mean? I'll probably break the edge with a bevel on the router to start with, and then below that, which will help me set this down, but I'll use 1/2 of that foam pipe insulation that I like to use with some spray glue on it, and I'll apply it actually around all 3 sides if I have the time, in which case it would be actually easier if the ends were flush, the ends of the tread were flush. So if we get to a point where that's what we want, we'll just hack the edge of the tread right off. But then I'll have that sort of cathedral style bull nose with a little bit of a reveal on each step, which will throw a natural shadow once everything's painted the same. And rather than being set to the very flush top of these where your foot might kick or rip into it, it'll sit down as a result of that bevel, and a thing altogether from afar, it will look good. I did end up putting a caster out here. It's not going to break anything, but I think there's just too much bounce. I don't have any weight. I don't have any counterweight on the other side of this, but I was stepping on it out here, and I can just show you the kind of collateral. Maybe you can see it. Maybe there's side-to-side wiggle, which is one thing. This thing will be up on brakes, which should stop that. But the collateral deflection there, I don't like that. And so I determined that 1 1/4 inch stack up on top of the same type of caster that the rest of the thing is on, since this tread was at a random elevation. Once it's stuck down, that'll actually carry that point load of stepping up onto that and going on up. Best case, or even better, would be to have one on either corner here, and we may end up doing that, but I just keep burning up wheels. This thing has already got 6, that makes 7, and so, you know, it's a major piece. I am going to use some random 2x8. That was a 2x10. I don't know if I talked about this, but I just need to put a 45-degree angle and this entirety of this arc into some material. So it doesn't have to be as thick in this dimension, and it only needs to be long enough to get from that point of the arc to, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches worth of this 45. Just so there's enough registration to tack these on so that the arc basically works out flush with the bottom of this circular rim joist and works out to come in and fly flush down the face of each one of these studs. And so we'll apply that to the same side all the way from this side of the stairs to the center, and then we'll go to the other side of every stud and go the rest of the way around, so that the distance from center to center of each one of those little arced pieces is the same distance, except for the back center piece, which is a little bit different, which will mean that we can make all the others the same, and we can make them out of cardboard, and they will essentially be the dimension from the top point to this point over here, the dimension of the bottom point from there to there, and then the length that it takes to do the arch. So it'll be a polygon, it'll be a trapezoid, a long thin trapezoid. Anyway, they'll all sit in here and roll from bottom to top, and it'll be faceted, but evenly faceted. We'll tape all the seams and stuff, and then we'll put a thin strip between where the bottom of that cardboard comes in, and the floor will be wrapped with Luan going in the other aspect, and we'll tape that seam. But what you'll get here is what we're looking at here, is this general tower that flares out in terms of stone, and that will mean once everything's all the same color, it'll also mean that we can just put simple seams in black. What I'd really like to do, the idea being that it looks like pie pieces of stone that were set together to create this whole segment. So we haven't got to have all this busy stone, texture painted on or anything else like that. It can just look like large sections of stone. I think that's what I'm going to do. And to give them 3 dimensions, it's nice if you can use like a fuzzy, soft, like maybe 2-inch wide. There's the color that say it's medium gray, and then like a 50% tone, and then a 2-inch wide stripe all the way down of a slightly darker gray to represent a bit of shadow, soft but straight and true dry brush sort of thing, and then a very thin black line, which is the actual, theoretically, the negative space, the crack between them. So it looks like there's the tone on the face of it, the tone as it turns in and is theoretically that shadow color, and then where it plunges down into a very thin crack is a black line. So it's like a 2-inch wide gray line, a thin black line, and then right where the darker gray meets the medium gray, you can put a little lighter gray highlight on one side or the other, both, whatever you want. But it has that chrome, that rendering chrome effect where a couple different gray tones and a black in the right spacing and layout makes it look like, once again, these are big slices of pie-shaped stone with that profile that sit together for both the cathedral and for her tower. Either or, I haven't quite decided. And like we said, we tucked the stairs in as narrow as we could so that they can't be seen from the other side. But overall, I was nervous about taking this, so that was like, I needed to know how much of this to take out because I had left this complete to do as much supporting of the cantilever as I could, and I knew I was going to have to notch out where that plane comes in. So I actually applied this test piece to both sides temporary and threw the line from there over to the plywood with the cardboard, and then was able to cut it out roughly like that. Anyway, I thought that notch might compromise the cantilever strength in the plywood, but it doesn't seem to be any worse than it was before that piece was missing, which was good. And again, all the steps are the same height and depth, so for safety's sake. And what else? Oh, the geyser, we finally got the fog geyser out. It comes out of there. So I think what I'll do is set it either down here or up underneath this framing. I won't have to accommodate the body of the machine in the framing, and then I'll just run a cardboard tube over this thing that's a bit bigger and bring that through the surface of the floor flush with just a hole saw hole. So there'll just be a 6-inch hole or something missing from the floor where the geyser effect comes through, and then separately there's a trap door. So basically Farquaad can shuffle back on his knees here until he clears the geyser hole, and then his real legs can stand up in the hole here with his fake legs down on what appears to be the floor with the geyser effect just in front of it, and basically just squat down and pull the whole puppet legs and himself down into this opening as the geyser effect goes off in front of him, and so I think we'll be able to handle that when I get to it. I'm just getting down to the end of my workday today. Really feeling the pressure here. We've got this rolling campfire that I'm trying to create. I'm going to put this circle or one like it on some caster wheels, and then we got these Amazon special rechargeable multi-effect. I mean, they do that, and they have a solid, and then there's like a slow fade and then it fades back down again. We got a couple of them here, and so I'm thinking of the sonotube over the fan, only about that high, with the plywood creating a shelf all the way around, and at least 2, if not 3 or 4 of these on the front half of this fire set in here about like that. So you're getting the orange glow, and there's a flat surface to support some fake stones and wood piled all around this tube, which obscures the fan, and then the fan's got the flapping fabric flame licking up the top of it. And so then all I got to do is just crinkle up some cellophane, I think, some saran wrap, crinkle it all up real good and cover up those light sources, and then dry brush with black and maybe a little bit of gray. And so you get like a coal effect. So all the black and gray becomes the coal bricks, and the little clear areas that are preserved because of the texture are where the little orange lights flicker out through it. So you have a little orange flickering coal bed, some raw ends of logs around that and stone outside of it, and then the flames lick out from the top. And I think there's something there for a battery-powered safety bonfire / campfire. So we got that sort of roughed in there. And then I've got a solution for both the shelter that they hide in second act, and in the first act it can be the outhouse at Shrek's land. So we don't need a Shrek house, so just have the outhouse there, which is, I forget how they have done it in many shows. So and we'll use either side of the same kind of set piece for that. And obviously Duloc, we've got to get our rolling doors, which are in the basement. We've got to pull them up here. They've got to go outside and around and back in the doors to be on this level, and then we'll have them on the stage and they can start blocking with them, and I can start adding to them to make it look like Duloc, but still feeling the pressure. All right, we'll see you. All right, let's talk about putting the floor on this thing quick. Because of the radial framing in here, we were able to leverage so much. We got interesting shape to the stairwell because it's based on that radial array, or that polar array. We'll be able to repeat this shape over and over all the way around it and ultimately put that sculpted shape on there. But in the end, it's a bit unhandy to put a surface on because these aren't on a consistent center, and there's a few other, there's a double joist in this aspect and a single in that aspect. So basically what I did here was I figure we're going to need 4 full sheets. I put one sheet on here and I pushed it all around, and despite being able to cover this in other ways, you end up not returning areas of the sheet because there's no stick there, there's no joist there. And sure, you could throw a block in and start catching the edges of the sheet, but in the end I don't know that you're going to save all that much material. So what I ended up doing was set the 4x8 and justified it to the face of one of these here, and so we'll need 4 sheets to do all 4 quadrants, but we'll end up trimming enough to land on one whole joist for this double, and right down the middle of the joist, like you would in any other circumstance, on this single. And it meant just 2 straight cuts, and this fits this opening. We do it on that side, and I can cut any amount back to create a shelf for a triangular trapdoor cover for where Farquaad disappears. But on this side, we need some sort of a level or a bed or whatever for that Sleeping Beauty sort of scenario where Fiona's lying down, and so we don't need a floor in here necessarily. And so that gets cheats our sheet out far enough to overhang the circle, which is where we want it. If we snugged it up in order to have floor there, then we have to add pieces out at the outside. So anyway, I sent it out, and again, the framing is going to help us here because I know that's a 45 degree angle here, although I didn't even bother with finding angles. I set the sheet where I knew that I wanted it, essentially at the halfway point on the sheet, at the halfway point of this joist, and then I justified the edge of the factory edge of the sheet to the face of the joist and used a couple clamps there, and then I just established the center line of this. I went underneath it and I actually scribed the face of this and then just moved that line over 3/4 of an inch, and I scribed the face of this one and I moved it over 1.5 inches. And in the end, we have what we need in here, and it's mounted down, but the waist will make a nice stencil for making the other pieces, because I was real careful about all the studs and everything here, so I know if I copy that 3 more times, knock on wood, it'll essentially fit really nicely. So I just threw the negatives up on here. I'll slice them off, and that piece will sit here next to that one. I can't set a piece on here and trace it again like I did the first one, because I'm going to be sitting up onto this, so I'd have to unscrew this and do the same thing over and over again, and all kinds of shuffling around. So this is a little thing that I thought of quick, which will be helpful. And then all 4 will be on here without any kind of circular trim on the outside. I did transpose the marker line from below, like when I scribed those pieces there, I scribed the outside edge just as a reference. But essentially, once all 4 are on there, I'll put a screw in the middle and I'll use string or a stick of wood, and I'll use it like a compass, but I want a couple extra inches of subfloor overhanging the rim joist, because I want some kind of inside crown molding, or if I don't want that in the end, I can always cut some off. I can't add it back, so I'm going to swing 2 or 3 inches bigger than this circle all at one time and cut it all at one time, and that's how we'll put the surface on here. I'll also cut out the notch for that step. So I just figured I'll save you guys missing this opportunity to use these pieces. If you're careful, they'll work to make all 4 surfaces, and you just consume 4 sheets. All right, just a couple tricks here. I did end up using a stick screwed to the center, and then I thought I wanted, because I knew that the framing was a 10-foot diameter circle, I thought 10-foot 4 would be nice, and I'd have plenty of overhang for a nice big crown mold or whatever I decided to do under there. But I ended up, that's where this line was here, I ended up with this small notch on both sides here, And they are at the halfway point, so you're going to look at this thing from this side, and then this side, and the outside edge will probably be lost. However, I also had an opportunity to measure over to the joist here, to the rim joist, and I was at just about 5 inches at this line. So to move back to 3.5 in both cases meant that I get a whole circle out of everything. I took the opportunity to do that right in this little window on both sides, also just to see what kind of concentricity, because these are two different things. There's the outside surface of the rim joist, which is a factor of the framing and adding layers and layers of luan that I'm bending between the ends of them, doing a circle that's theoretically 10-foot diameter. And then there's this circle that I'm drawing with this center point, and he's theoretically concentric to that center as well. Anyway, the measurement ended up practically the same here, and it was the same out in this sense, and so I just moved it into that notch, so I was getting a smooth edge all the way around, maximizing then, see here's what's left. That's the difference in material between here and the line I intended to cut and the line that I ended up cutting. And so then we have larger areas in the waist. Nothing that you folks can't figure out for yourselves, but I'll just make mention of it here. The other thing is, if I start in here and I get cutting and I'm jiggy, and then all that negative is hanging over here, then I get over here and it's going to start ripping and tearing my cut. So if I leave my scribe or my compass stick, I swung him underneath the negative as I finished the cut, so I can do that in all 4 instances here, so one guy can support the negative as it comes off and not tear and destroy the edges of that stuff there. I will say that this CDX has got, like, these aren't even that big of a deal. I saw these when I was buying it and was like, I don't love that. That's actually not the problem. It's that first layer that's lifting with putting the screws into it. The first layer is like lifting because the screws are construction screws with reverse thread, and so it's walking up the first layer of plywood and creating like toe stabbing situations like that. It's not completely glued. It's kind of a shitty batch of plywood. It should be sticking itself all the way together. Actually, earlier in the series, we looked at some plywood they got last year that was fully falling apart. So I don't know what's going on with lumber right now and sheet good industry, but that's that. Oh, and lastly, I'm using these these are at Lowe's. They're jigsaw blade, but they're obviously like quite long. I think they're 8 or 9 inches deep, and so that's how you can profile a 6x6 or even an 8x8 with these. But I even use them on thinner stuff when I'm trying to avoid that typical jigsaw blade bevel rather than being at 90 degrees to the surface for the sake of moving quickly. I'm also using the oscillate setting, so you see that rolling around like this. You can turn that off so it just goes up and down, but it makes a giant difference to the speed with which you can move through the material. And so I use those a lot, even an 1.5 to 2 inch, like all the pergola rafters for that other project. When we're putting profiles and shapes on those, I'll use these because they're just so heavy and stiff and straight that the cut ends up always being really nice and 90 degrees rather than migrating to one side or the other. So I'm going to finish this up, and then they can use this to practice on today, which will be good.